Set My Heart on Fire immediately was the most recent album from Perfume Genius, which came out last year, about mid last year. I think it was about May-ish time, June, about that time. Ish, yeah. And we have less than a year later a remix album which came out just this past week. We have a bunch of interesting names all over this thing, and I don't tend to review like remix albums very often. I did the 100 Gex one from last year for similar reasons as well. There were interesting names all over that thing, and it's just not something I tend to perk my ears up with. When I hear about them, I'm just like, oh yeah, remixes, cool, I guess, not something I'm that excited about. But when it's an artist that I truly really love, and again, interesting names are all over the thing, I'm not gonna miss the opportunity to check it out. And what intrigued me mostly with an album like this was because it's an artist I love, obviously, and also it ended up being my least favorite album from said artist. So I was a bit like, oh, okay, how are we gonna remix these songs, and are we gonna change them in a way that makes them better or worse, or like what's gonna happen here? And giving it a listen, with the first listen I gave it, I was really surprised because these artists have really changed the material here. It's not like every track is like a dance banger type track. It's not those kinds of remixes. It's a much more detailed and a well thought out remix release here, where you've got all of these artists coming through, adding their own spin on the tracks, and really just adding their own unique details to them, which make them such unique artists to begin with, while also turning these songs into completely different worlds, if you will. The A.G. Cook remix for Describe gotta be the best example for what I just said there. This is easily the most, well, not the most, the biggest change from the original song. This sounds nothing like the original track. It's crazy. It's a really interesting interpretation. You've got the kind of garage beat. Honestly, it sounds like it came out straight out of a garage track, which I find really interesting. And the drumming here is fantastic. It's just such an interesting way to manipulate a song like this. The actual song is so heavy and filled and lathered in reverb and just an extremely like powerful wall of sound that Perfume Genius managed to really sing over quite beautifully. But then you've just got this completely shifted change, which I find amazing, and yet it still sounds good. And I think that's what I like most about this remix album, honestly. Like, even when some of the remixes weren't necessarily better than the originals, they still sounded good. Without You is the best example of that, with the just got these names written down, Jimmy Stack, who I don't really know much about, but he adds these like little guitar licks after the chorus, which I really find enjoyable, and it's just a nice little quirky addition to the song. The actual remix is nowhere near as urgent as Without You, and honestly I love the original Without You quite a lot, so it would be hard to beat that version, but I still think what he does with the track is really good. What I find impressive with the opening track Whole Life, which is the Jaiko Aino Kalevi remix, is that it manages to just bring in this magical feel to the song that really feels like a classic Perfume Genius track. This could have fit on No Shape really beautifully. The instrumental just feels fuller, and it adds this really sparking beauty to it that I just, again, am really head over heels for, because it just reminds me of the best elements of Mike's voice. And I don't even know if the original track that Mike gave us on the album did that as well as this remix, which I find really bizarre. But this is probably one of the only cases where I would truly say that the remix brought in the classic Perfume Genius elements over the actual song. Because Jason, for example, as good as this remix is from Planning to Rock, it doesn't really sound like anything like Perfume Genius has ever done. But what's weird is the Whole Life remix does sound exactly like something he would do, and it's kind of surprising that the actual song that made the album doesn't sound like this. It's so weird. So basically what I'm trying to say, massive thumbs up to the remix there, because that one is fantastic. But going back to Jason, this man sounds like a track that The Knife would do. The beat on this one is so bloody dirty. It's a dirty beat. It breathes this extra life. Breathes, not breathes. Breathes. Sounded very British there with the breathes. This extra life into the vocals, which I really appreciate, because the actual original track is very, very reined in, pulled back. Mike is just whispering and whimpering on this track, on the original one. But this one just manages to take the track into a completely different direction and makes it sound like you're in a club and you're just bopping along to this. Jason and me. There are two tracks that sound very, very 80s. You got On the Floor, On Your Body Changes Everything. Somehow On the Floor sounds way more 80s than it originally did, even though the original does sound like it came out of the 80s. And the Boy Harsher remix for Your Body Changes Everything has a lovely melody to it. Really like what Boy Harsher did with this track. Really odd, because I remember listening to Boy Harsher's music in the past, and I don't think it ever really quite sounded like this. So a nice little change of pace for the song, and also for Boy Harsher's own music. Just has a very timeless feel to it, in a similar way like a Cure track would. Not like it's on par with everything the Cure ever did, but it just has a similar feel to it like that. Just a Touch is a remix from Danny L. Hall. If you remember, I did a review of Danny L. Hall's album, which came out last month, I think it was, or earlier this month. It was a few weeks back anyway. It wasn't really big on the album. I thought it was a bit too in your face and boisterous at times, which I could see why people would like it for that, but it just got a bit grating for me. But weirdly, Just a Touch doesn't really have that. It's definitely energetic and very inspired and fiery, but it's not quite as all over the place with the vocals and weird in that way. Quite interesting to see where Danny L. Hall takes more remixes of other artists' work though, because obviously if his own individual music sounds like it does, then he could probably do more remixes like this and just add a nice little spice to it and bring life to it, without the overdoing of the vocals and stuff. Now towards the end, I will say there are a few tracks that don't quite grip me, although I will say even earlier than that, the track Leave, which is a Jenny Haval track, doesn't really do much for me either. I guess it's kind of interesting to hear her little voiceover at the end where she's talking about reverb and her imagination when she was younger and making music and things like that. It was quite cool to see her add her own little like voiceover in that kind of way, but everything leading up until that point wasn't really that great. And honestly, with Some Dream and One More Try, it's a similar story actually. These tracks just don't have much going for them. They're obviously meant to be gloomier and a bit more like spookier and atmospheric, but I don't know, I thought Actress would have brought something a bit more to the table than that. This just didn't have much of a standout quality to it. It just felt very nondescript. They feel abstract, and I like the sort of experimental approach that you take with these two tracks. But yeah, I just wasn't too enamored with what was going on. Katie Day adds a great touch to the final track there, Borrowed Light. Just feels very much inspired by her previous albums, with the even like spin on Mike's voice that she throws in, which sounds like something you'd hear in her own albums. I really like that, and I like the interpretation that she came from with this remix. It's very peculiar sounding, but goddamn, that is the best word you can use to describe anything Katie's ever put out there. So yeah, generally lots of good things to say, and a weird sort of analysis from me here, because I think I'm ending up sounding and being more positive than the actual album that we got from Perfume, Genius, which I wasn't quite expecting. But they're two obviously separate albums. Obviously this remix album comes from the original album, but I feel like what makes this good is very different to what makes Set My Heart on Fire immediately good. I just think it's really impressive how all of these artists took these tracks in a completely different direction and made their own interpretation of them and put their own spin on it, and most of it sounded really, really bloody good. Only a few tracks that I wouldn't really call that good, but the ratio is pretty heavily weighted towards the positives. So yeah, honestly, I'm going to go 7 out of 10. I like this. I thought there was lots to take away from this that's really positive, and each of these artists should be proud, because I think it's a difficult job to take someone else's album or take someone else's song and do your own interpretation of it and make it sound good, and they bloody did that. So yeah, I'm impressed. I really like this. Hopefully you guys like it in the comments as well, so you should tell me in the comments as well what you think, what your favorite track was, and that would be great. Let me know your thoughts. Do tell me why I'm wrong as well. I'm sure you'll have the time to tell me why I'm wrong. Thank you for watching. Do have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already as well. That would be great, and goodbye.